we continue with the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry that is currently adjourned for lunch. We're now joined by SABC News senior reporter Canny Maphanga, who's at the Commission, joined by political analyst and commentator Lukhona Mnguni. Canny, it's over to you.
All right, thank you, Mfundo. Good afternoon to the viewers. Essentially, what we have dealt with so far is the disbandment of the political killings task team, of course, the impact that followed and the consequences that would have followed such a decision. And now we're in the realm of the various key players that would have allegedly frustrated the work of the PKTT and would have ensured that such a task team does not exist within the criminal justice system. We've seen the Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi go into an elaborate form of evidence that seeks to paint a picture of the kind of role players you would have seen and the patterns and trends that you can draw from each of these role players with respect to his evidence regarding the efforts to, or the elaborate efforts to frustrate the work of the PKTT and ensure that it doesn't succeed, especially with the arrests of key figures which are part of this bigger theme that he seeks to expose of this alleged organized crime syndicate within the criminal justice system. There's a lot to unpack that political analyst Lukhona Mnguni is going to join me with right now as we try to sift through and comb through that very elaborate information that he's presented right now. Essentially, in Mfundo, what you have to do is to try and join the dots at this stage. It's not as obvious as it seems. However, as you go through the various evidence that he's put forth in the commission, you'll start to see a pattern and a trend that he's obviously trying to highlight to the commission with respect to this threat to the administration of justice in South Africa. I think where we can start is he has now officially started dropping names. And if we look at the portion of Parliament, he looks at figures that would have represented Parliament in the oversight role of the police, and how one particular figure, that is Fadiel Adams, would have gotten information relating to crime intelligence. And instead of allegedly using that information towards the work of Parliament, uses it to advance a particular interest that you can see is trying to link towards this overall efforts to frustrate or ensure that the PKTT does not continue to advance its work in South Africa, particularly in two provinces. He highlights the Western Cape and Gauteng through the Orlando Police Station and the Cape Town Police Station. What did you get? What did you draw from that information?
Kenny, good afternoon to you and your viewers, of course. I mean, it's day 2 and we still have about 40 more pages of that affidavit from Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi to go through. So, and of course, some of the matters being canvassed now are also going to feature again later on, as he has said. So, as you are saying, it's quite early days. But I think what is beginning to emerge, and I mean, of course, I must not fry the commission's chairperson, but he said, you know, his question as to why would there be such laborious efforts on a non-complaint, because and that's because I'm starting to see a trend here, and where probably Mkhwanazi is going, which is to try and say the 2 complaints laid by Adams in Cape Town and then 2 days later in Orlando Police Station, probably one were not only of his own action, they were probably coordinated elsewhere. But I think the important part that he makes about Adams is that because he's not a member of the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence, he ought not to have received classified information to begin with. And once he had the classified information in his possession, he ought to have taken it to the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence in Parliament, because he says as a lawmaker he ought to have known what the National Intelligence Act says in terms of handling that information. So actually Mkhwanazi's first charge is that Adams, one, should not have had the information. Secondly, had he had it, he should have taken it to the right forum in Parliament. And thirdly, he probably abused the information that was at his disposal. And I think that's really the important charge here. And of course, when you talk about where the coordination comes from, I think he's charging that the Minister of Police's office and Adams may have been acting in cahoots.
Speaking on that, Adams allegedly gets this information. He's a lawmaker. He doesn't utilize the parliamentary process. He goes and opens those cases and then writes to the Minister of Police for his intervention. What do you make of the steps that he took instead of heading to Parliament, if he felt that there was a genuine concern with the work of the PKTT or how the funds were being used towards the advancements of the PKTT?
Look, Kenny, I mean, I'm not a fundamentalist about classified information as to, just because it's classified. I've always believed that if it's in the public interest, something ought to be done about any document that lands on your desk in the best interest of the public. We've fought the secrecy bill for over a decade now, particularly because of those issues, to say you must insert a public interest clause in any form of classification, because otherwise you will classify corruption. Now, the point, though, here is that you have to look at the timeline. You open a case, you go open another case, identical case, in another jurisdiction 2 days later, and then the next day you file a complaint that your investigation is being intercepted. I think that points to a potential malafide in the actions of the complainant. And of course, I mean, the complainant is now an implicated person by the Commission. They will be granted the opportunity to probably present themselves before the Commission.
All right, thank you very much. That was political analyst Lukhona Mnguni going through this version of the evidence. Of course, more questions for the now suspended Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. Not only is there an allegation that places him at the center of this organized crime syndicate, but now we've moved towards parliamentarians and the alleged collusion between them and the now suspended police minister, and ensuring that the work of the PKTT was frustrated in its efforts to administer justice to South Africans. We expect more of that testimony after the lunch adjournment at 2 o'clock. Over to you in studio.
All right, Ken, it seems that the Commission today has made great headway, but we leave it there. There's SABC News senior reporter Canny Maphanga speaking to us there.